Today, it's a pleasure to welcome Caitlin Bailey from Vimy Foundation. Caitlin, can you maybe start by telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Vimy Foundation and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the executive director of the Vimy Foundation. I have been since 2012. So as the executive director, I'm kind of the big boss, if you will, or the small boss in this case. And the Vimy Foundation is a heritage educational organization. So we look at the story of Canada's First World War experience and how we can provide educational opportunities for young people, particularly young Canadians, to learn about that event and really develop their democratic participation skills, their critical thinking skills, and help to give them the tools that they need to be able to navigate what is, as we know, a quite a complicated world.
How do you draw the connection between learning about history and heritage in Canada's role in the First World War to citizenship and becoming better leaders in community?
A lot of what history and the study of history does is to teach a few things. It teaches critical thinking, as we said. So it teaches you to understand and to look at, where are these narratives coming from? What is the bias or not that a person may have? How does my viewpoint as someone trying to understand an event that took place 100 years ago, how is that going to affect how I look at it? History also teaches a really important skill that I think is certainly needed now, which is the concept of historical empathy. And empathy is not the same as sympathy. Empathy is a concentrated effort to attempt to understand what might influence a person to act a certain way. And history is a really, really great tool to teach that. We do not think or understand the world in the same way that someone 110 years ago thought about or understood their world. And so the study of the First World War, as far as we're concerned, is a really, really good um, test case, I would say, for young people to be able to start to try to develop those skills in an environment that is an educational environment. It's not kind of out in the world. It's definitely a controlled space, and give them the opportunity to explore some of those questions and to think about how this event or how conflict in general has shaped Canada, shaped their lives and their realities as well, because conflict continues in our reality. Many people are touched by conflict, and allowing them to kind of have the chance to work through that through a historical event that is far enough away, we'll say, that it's not direct. It's not something that was 20 years ago, but it's still very, very familiar. And the experiences and the emotions of the people who live that are still very familiar to the students who are studying it with us now.
I mean, they say history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So
Yes.
I guess maybe just to sort of set the stage, I guess I grew up in Canada, went to school in Western Canada, raised at a certain time. We were taught a little bit about Vimy Ridge, but there may be people listening who really don't understand what Vimy is and the impact that it has to Canadians. Can you give a brief summary of what Vimy is and kind of that legacy and the learning that you're trying to protect and preserve?
I'll do my best to be brief. So the Battle of Vimy Ridge is fought beginning on the 9th of April, 1917. It is the first time that all four Canadian divisions fought together as the Canadian Corps. So it was, in that sense, kind of a big moment in the creation of a modern army for Canada. Previous to the First World War, it was the Canadian Army was a militia force. It was not a large regular force. So this was, from a military history perspective, it is a special moment. In terms of where it sits in our public memory, the Battle of Vimy Ridge has the distinction of being the first really clear victory that Canada fought in the First World War. They had 2 very tough years up until then. And from 1917 onwards, they go on to being very, very successful. And it is taught in schools and throughout kind of Canadian learning at a certain level that the performance of Canada in the First World War garnered us a seat at the Treaty of Versailles and was an important step into the realization of what became in 1967 an independent Canada that was no longer a dominion of the British Empire. So it's an identity moment. It's a military history moment. It is a 20th century, I would say, a big 20th century moment for Canada. This is sort of the point where Canadians start to come to recognize themselves as Canadians specifically, and not kind of as a group of, different people who had immigrated to Canada or who were in Canada for different reasons. And this formation of this kind of like identity of Canadians tends to be traced in many ways to this Vimy Ridge battle. Obviously, everything I just told you, every historian will pick that apart and tell you that it's absolutely not true, or that it's this or that it's that or any of those things. But for us, really, at the Vimy Foundation, we do see this as a window into the First World War, and something that is a touchstone for many Canadians. That if you ask them, what is the First World War, that's kind of the one thing that most of us will know a little something about.
I've got several feet of pages behind me that will attest to the writing about history is always nuanced.
Yes.
I guess I'm curious to come back to something we started with when it comes to teaching the history. And I know Vimy Foundation has a lot of programs that are targeted at youth. Is it more than just the teaching of history and civic responsibility and how to see the world through a nuanced lens? Can you tell me a little bit about the impact that you're having on Canadian youth today?
I think that aside from, nuances of history and critical thinking and all of those things, the programs that we do, particularly, well, all of our youth programs, really, they are national programs. So we recruit nationally, we recruit across the country. We also recruit in both languages. And so this is a chance for the students who participate in our programs, because they do spend quite a lot of time together, to actually meet people from elsewhere in Canada, and see how big Canada is and how people's viewpoints, depending on where they are in the country, differ and how their experiences are different. So like you, I grew up in the West. I had a very different vision of Canada than when I moved east and discovered what what's, I guess, central Canada. We always called it Eastern Canada, but I've learned now you have to refer to it as central Canada. But it's very much like even that, just that exposure of a group of, we do groups of 20, that group of 20 young people who maybe for the first time are meeting someone from Nunavut, or they're meeting someone from the first time from St. John's, who has a very different education system. They have a lot of differences. And so this has a real, in the short term, a really important bridging experience, I think, for young people to learn about what it is that Canada actually is. We're a federated state, which is sometimes a little chaotic. We have very different ways of being. We're very large. And so giving these young people the opportunity to make connections with each other and form relationships with people who they might not normally meet, who are their own age, is really, really important. And we see that continue on into our alumni group. We have an alumni an alumni council, an alumni association at this point. We've been doing youth programs since 2006. So this is our 20th year of youth programs. Our first program was in 2005 or 2006, deep back in the old days. It was 5 people, 6 people. It was very small. We have over 1,000 alums at this point. The eldest is almost 40 and the youngest is 15. And that's really special. And that group still has bonds that they've formed that continue on through their work in the Alumni Council, through the things that they participate in with us, and then as well in their relationships with each other. We really see when students are graduating, especially, and they're starting to make decisions about where they're going to university, that often they form attachments with each other in their new universities. So we have a little clump of kids in Montreal who are from all over Canada, who, again, were from multiple programs, who are all together. They know each other through the alumni group, and they're able to form networks of support for each other, and that network will continue on as they seek, jobs, as they go out into their professional experience. And all of that, I think, is really, really important, especially at a time where we are dealing with people talk about the loneliness epidemic and all of that sort of stuff, and a sense of dislocation with young people, especially, and trying to build community, and how difficult it is for people to build community. It's almost a skill that we've lost. And so a program like this, where they are physically with each other, they're not on a phone, they're not, doing anything, it's not on Twitch, they're physically with each other, and they're forming bonds and relationships that go on for, many years afterwards. And finally, we are, from a purely, call it a purely financial view, we are usually an early scholarship for students, and scholarships tend to build on each other. So our students go on to, we have several that have received Lauren Foundation scholarships, which is a significant fully funded university scholarship. That's 4 years of university. We have Horatio Alger students. We have Rhodes Scholarship students. So for them, Vimy is kind of the first scholarship that they do. We often are writing reference letters for young people who are going on to building scholarship dossiers and higher education dossiers. And it's a really important part in how they're building that kind of higher education path, is starting with the Vimy Foundation and moving up. So from a purely, from that point of view as well, an investment in the Vimy Foundation to send a young person has a cumulative effect of, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars for that young person, as they're going through their post-secondary and then into their professional careers.
I want to come back to, right off the top, you said that, part of the role of Vimy Foundation is to protect and preserve the history and heritage of Canada's involvement in the First World War. And with the number of new Canadians that have come to Canada, how do you see new Canadians engaging with a history that may not be deeply rooted in parents and grandparents and great-grandparents? How do you see new Canadians kind of, I don't know if it's coming to terms or just accepting that, hey, I'm a Canadian, and this is part of a shared experience that we have as Canadians?
So the Battle of Vimy Ridge is taught on the citizenship test. And I think there is I wouldn't necessarily say that new Canadians are not engaged in the First World War. They have a very different experience based on where they came from. The First World War was a world war. And so our experience as, people who, for Canadians who had grandparents and great-grandparents in the First World War, in the Canadian context is very different from the French context, for example, or the British context. And the way that we view the First World War is extremely different. We see it as a very proud moment. And in France and Britain, in particular in Britain, it is a national tragedy. India has thousands of soldiers who were engaged in the First World War. The battles in East Africa, in Central Africa, all of those also touched many, many people. So I think the thing that I'm always interested in is how the First World War has filtered down to people, and how their cultural history and their family history is different from maybe what we're taught in Canada, but it's still an experience that people can understand and relate to. And it's part of learning about being in a new place.
Has that influenced or shifted the way that you talk to young people, or the way you work with educators to try and educate about the importance of Vimy? I know I'm using Vimy as sort of a shorthand for the First World War, but has that perspective really evolved over the last 15 or 20 years since you've been involved in the organization?
Certainly, I think the teaching of the First World War in general in Canada has evolved over the last 15 years. I have been actively involved with my colleagues in shaping the Vimy experience since about 2017 or 2018. And there's a definite, I'm going to call it widening of the perspective of the First World War, of not, of looking and saying, okay, what are some of the other experiences of different communities in the First World War? They're often called professionally undertold stories, which is not necessarily a name that I really like. But it's looking at many, many different aspects of the First World War. And that goes from everything from, industrial history and women's history and community history, and really moving away from the sort of big battles view of the war in general, which I think has been a trend in military history for the last 15 years. It doesn't feel all that radical to us now, but Tim Cook's books, when they first came out, were like an earthquake. And that he was talking about individual people who had not written memoirs and were not generals, and were, writing letters home where they were complaining about stuff, and they were grumpy, and they were swearing and all that sort of stuff that was just not how we taught military history. So it's changed enormously. And I think that the interest that we see from young people in our programs is incredibly high. We have 20 spots for a program, and we get almost 200 applications a year.
Yeah.
So
So
it's great to see. People still are interested in it.
So it's undeniable the impact you're having on the young people you have come through, and you mentioned kind of the alumni. What about us older folks? What can we take away from Vimy Foundation? You mentioned the Vimy experience. Maybe if somebody's interested in learning more about Canadian history, or more about the First World War experience, and especially the Battle of Vimy Ridge, what are some of the resources that you've been able to pull together to help people on that path?
So we do what we call general educational programming. So we have educational programming for young people, and then we do larger projects that are really geared at the general population, and kind of saying, if you're interested in this topic, here are some different ways to look at it. Try this. A lot of what we've been doing in the last few years has been concentrating on large scale digital projects, so digital history projects, doing things like we created an app for the Vimy Memorial site. It's a walking app, so if you're on site, you can explore the site and learn stories of different events and different things that happened on that site. If you're off site, you can navigate around the site and still experience those walking paths. We are in the middle of finishing, and we'll be relaunching a very large project that we started in 2023 on Walter Allward and the building of the Vimy Memorial. So again, adding to, the initial knowledge that people may have around, yes, there is a memorial there, but here's the person who built it, here's what influenced him, here's how um, here's how modern or contemporary artists engage with that very large piece of public art, things like that. So those are all available on our website. We're always happy to have people take a look at those and learn something new. We have as well a museum collection at our space in Montreal that's open during the tourism season, so from April to November. And again, people can come in and really have a firsthand experience of our museum reserve, and actually, see First World War artifacts and the stories that go with them.
Just for some context, you mentioned the site and you mentioned the memorial. This is in France, the Vimy
This is
Memorial.
in France, yes, and we don't manage it.
No, as I understand it, it's a French territory that's been granted to the Canadians as a memorial
Yes,
for
yeah.
the battle at Vimy Ridge.
Yeah.
I'm other than the museum collection, and obviously there's a lot of resources. How engaged are you becoming in what's coming up? You mentioned April 9th, 1917. We're here in 2026. We're 110 years out next year. Are there
Yes.
anything special planned?
Yeah, we have a lot of things that are going to be coming up in the next 12 months. We run a yearly communications campaign from the 2nd of April to the 9th of April, sharing stories about the Vimy battle and about individuals who participated in that. We have some celebrity spokespeople this year, I'm proud to announce. Um, these are my first celebrities, Craig. It's really important to me. So we do have some spokespeople for that, and we really are going to have about 12 months of concentrated digital programming that's going to be running from this year until Vimy 110 next year, working with local partners as well in France to help support their activities and what they're doing. And then obviously our youth programs that are continuing to run. I have a cohort going in 3 weeks. My next cohort goes in August, and we'll be recruiting again for the year afterwards.
I guess maybe it's a simple question, and you talked about a lot of the benefits of the work that you're doing, but why does this stuff matter? Like it's 110 years ago. Why is it important, and why is it important to us as part of the Canadian identity? Maybe that's a book in itself, but
It's your gotcha question. um, it's important because I think you need to look at these experiences and this story and realize how easily all of that could happen to you. And just because it was 110 years ago doesn't mean that it's not going to happen to you. And I always get a little woo-woo around this, but I really believe very strongly in the fact that you have a responsibility as a citizen in a democratic country where when there are decisions being made whether or not to go to war, you have to participate in that decision in however you're going to do it. And you have to learn what it means to take that decision. And the First World War is a great way to teach that.
yeah, well put. I mean, it's a long way away in the rearview mirror, but sometimes it feels like it's right beside us all the time.
It's very close, and it's also not very easily explained. There's hard to find a good guy, hard to find a bad guy. How did you get here? You know, how did you get from 1914 to 1918?
I don't know. I don't know how the world made it, but
I mean, we did somehow.
yeah. Listen, it's great to learn a little bit more about Vimy Foundation. I want to give you the opportunity. We've talked about younger people, older people. How do people get involved? How do they get engaged beyond obviously looking at some of the scholarship programs? What can people do if they're interested in learning more or supporting the work that you're currently doing?
So I think the easiest way is to get involved in one of our social channels. You can see what we're doing. We're on LinkedIn. We're on all the socials. For people who are looking for more information and more involvement, we have a wonderful newsletter that we send out monthly that gives, first access to all the things that we're doing. You can also support us through that newsletter. Noodling around on the website is fun. It's big, and there's an opportunity to support us there as well. And the other thing is just to send us an email. We do answer emails. We like to hear from people. We like it when people share their stories or tell us how something affected them. Or even just to ask for information. If you're going to Vimy Ridge and you don't really know where to look, we're happy to direct you to resources and places to go, to help you with your travel.
And we're recording this in March, but we've got April 9th coming up. Hopefully we can pique some people's curiosity. Anything planned for April 9th this year, or maybe talk about some of the things that you're doing as an organization to help commemorate Vimy Day?
Yeah, absolutely. We are, this is actually a really busy time of year for us. Our Vimy Pilgrimage Award students are traveling from the 1st to the 10th of April, sorry, the 2nd to the 10th of April. So they will be at Vimy Ridge on the 9th. There is a national ceremony at the Canadian National Vimy Memorial in France, which is where I will be, laying a wreath on behalf of the foundation. We encourage our alumni to attend local Vimy Day ceremonies wherever they can. So depending on the city, some cities have them, some don't. And we also always encourage people, if they want to start doing something for Vimy Day, to write to their town council, talk to them about doing it. We have some suggestions and support on how to do that. So we really do encourage that as well. And then we have our Vimy Day Comms campaign, which is going to be running from the 2nd to the 9th with my famous celebrities that I will not divulge.
Well, we'll be waiting with bated breath. Caitlin, I want to thank you for spending some time today and telling me and everybody else who's listening a little bit more about Vimy Foundation and the work that you're doing.
It's my pleasure, Craig. Thank you.